Hi, Nick.
Hey, Teddy, how you doing?
Good. Welcome to the debrief.
Great to see you. Excited for the
You
conversation.
too. This is going to be fun. So before we jump in, I'm going to cover like a couple of housekeeping notes for the folks at home. One, this is going to be recorded. So if you need to jump out for a sec, use the bathroom, whatever, no worries. You can always replay the highlights. Two, there is an ask a question field at the bottom of this Crowdcast platform. So if you have a question for Nick, drop it in there, and I'm going to do my best to try to pick up those relevant questions along the way.
Great.
A number of you have actually submitted questions ahead of time, so thank you for that. I'm going to try to work as many of those into the conversation as I can. And finally, for the first timers out there, this is the debrief presented by BrightHire. The debrief is a series of conversations with founders, executives, and thought leaders on how they've built talented and diverse teams. I'm your host, Teddy Chestnut, BrightHire co-founder, and today I am truly thrilled to welcome CEO of Gainsight, customer success thought leader, and birthday boy, Nick Mehta. Happy birthday, Nick.
Thank you.
I'm not going to ask you how old you are.
Yeah, it's my 29. So
there
next
you
year.
go.
Yeah.
I hope that shirt was a birthday gift. That is a stellar shirt.
You know, I would say it's funny. It's probably, you would think, oh, this is the shirt you bought on your birthday, but I'm a colorful shirt guy. So I wear shirts like this almost every single day.
Like you and my 9th grade physics teacher.
Oh, wow.
All right. We are not here to talk about that. We're here to learn from you and your hard-earned experience building great teams, of course, including the team that helped really kind of create the category of customer success and took Gainsight to $1 billion exit and beyond, right? Not done yet. So we're going to cover a lot. But before we jump in, we like to start with a little like rapid fire just to reduce this fun. All right. You ready?
Yep. Go for it.
You're a big Taylor Swift fan. What's your favorite Taylor Swift song?
I have to give you two. One is Blank Space, because if you or longtime Gainsight community members, we rewrote Blank Space. I rewrote it years ago to be about customer success, and so you can find that on YouTube. That's pretty fun. And then more recently, August. I'm definitely an Evermore and Folklore, obsessed person. So I love August.
All right, so big Taylor Swift fan, also big Steelers fan.
Yes.
If you had to pick one, you can't do. There you go. If you had to pick one, couldn't do two. Ben or Troy?
Troy for the hair. Troy Polamalu for the hair, for sure.
Okay, this was an interesting one. Of course, I was doing my homework. Most CEOs have a pretty sparse LinkedIn profile, right? The about section is pretty high level. I'm pulling yours up right now. Specialties, team, authentic culture, recruiting, alignment, leadership, product management, technology, sales, marketing, finance, domains. It's like you're looking for a job or something with all those specialties. If you had to if you had to pick one specialty, like what's your superpower? What's your one?
Really, really good at taking pop songs and rewriting them to be about sex. That's what I've done like dozens. My brain is constantly working on it. That's what I'm really good at.
Awesome. You co-founded a company in college called ChipShot. Height of the tech bubble, a couple years running, custom golf clubs.
Yep.
Your title was VP of Marketing.
Yeah.
The co-founder, and the company was literally best known for a commercial in which a guy gets hit with a golf ball in a inopportune spot.
Yep.
Were you the creative genius behind the commercial?
No, I wish I was.
Oh, come on.
I wish I was. It was the agency, so I got to give credit. But that commercial is the only thing that remains from that company. It's pretty funny. I do play golf, and every time I'm behind a tree and try to get back on the fairway, I am anticipating at some point I will reenact that commercial in real life.
You will pay for it eventually.
Yeah.
Okay. Two last quick ones. If you weren't a tech executive and you couldn't be a professional karaoke singer or like a Steelers wide receiver, what would you be doing instead? Like, what would your dream career be?
It's sort of back there. I love science and like physics and philosophy. So I'd probably be a professor. I mean, I don't know if I'd ever get the job. Be a professor of philosophy and the philosophy of science specifically.
Very cool. Okay. And last one, apropos of today, do you have a favorite birthday memory?
My 21st birthday, when my one of my college roommates, who was also a bartender, said I needed to do 21 shots, and somehow the memory's very fuzzy after he's
okay. That and the chip shot YouTube video are for another conversation.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, we've got a very strong CS contingent here today listening in. And so I wanted to start with your reflections on building and structuring and growing CS teams.
Great.
And so I wanted to start kind of way back at the beginning, very early days of Gainsight. Who was the first CS hire that you made?
Well, Dan Steinman, for sure. And Dan was he's basically almost like a co-founder of the company. He kind of helped launch the customer success movement. He was actually our customer at Marketo. So Marketo was one of our first customers, really like almost like a co-design partner. He ran customer success there and he came over to be our chief customer officer. And the job, Gainsight was always sort of two parts, even to this day. One part is running customer success for Gainsight. The other part is trying to help be a voice in the community. And Dan, wrote, with me, actually he did most of the work, wrote the first book on customer success that's become quite popular and, became a prolific speaker. So Dan Steinman.
How did you interview him? Like, how did you qualify? Or was it just like, I just know you're the right person? Like, what are the process?
It was sort of one of those, it's like a customer early on that believes in you. So I think, by the way, I can give you another one that's more, I think, an interview type, which was one of our first is Elaine Cleary. Elaine actually still, she stayed with us about 7 years and she still kind of consults with us now. Elaine knew some people at Gainsight and is still to this day one of our greatest, she's like one of the greatest CSMs in the history of the field. That I know I'm biased, but it's also true. And it's funny because what she has is this incredible range. She can go and sit with the Gainsight technical person at the client configuring the rules engine, which is a core part of Gainsight, and she can go meet with the CEO with 100% confidence. And all of our early clients are because of her. Almost all of our early clients are because of her confidence. And what won her the job was at our first Pulse conference, which is this event we do every year in customer success. I somehow on stage shared a haiku that I wrote about customer success. You had to be there. Elaine Cleary had sort of seen that. And then in the interview, closed out the interview, which was in person in Austin, with a haiku. So that's called
over the top.
That's called bringing it to the interview. Yeah.
Was that like part of the structured interview plan for this role?
We're in the haiku part of the interview. Exactly. 575 people.
You mentioned that she had this incredible range, right? Like executive level down to the technical details, which I wonder, was that reflective of the role at the time? So actually this is related to a question that Linda Greenwood, who leads member success at Revenue Collective, wrote in ahead of time. And she was wondering, like, how did you define what CS was supposed to look like in the early days? When like the team is growing, it's scrappy, like there's lots of disparate stuff to do. You need somebody who's talking to an exec one day and then doing tech support the next. Like, how did you define what the function was even supposed to look like?
Yeah, I think, by the way, trial and error for sure, because this was 2013, so none of us really knew what we were doing. And none of us really do, even to this day. We're just figuring it out. But I think that in hindsight, the CS team members that worked out the best did have a lot of range. And that range really involved like enough like passion and curiosity to really learn a product, right? Like, because you kind of have to, in the early days, if you don't understand the product as a CS person, it's really hard, right? But then enough confidence to go talk to a CEO. Now, Elaine was an experienced person. She'd been working, 20, 25 years, maybe more, before she joined Gainsight. You don't always get those kind of people early on in a CS job, right? And so it's a little more challenging. I think we got lucky because we were like the CS company hiring a CSM, and that's sort of in some ways, kind of a dream job, at least we like to think so. And so Elaine, I think we got somebody that we probably normally wouldn't have gotten. But that range concept, I think, applies even to people early in their career. And I think it comes down to then, like I said, the curiosity to basically be able to learn things, and then the confidence, self-confidence to be able to go connect with people. And I think those two things, there are some things you can kind of talk about in interviews to help assess that.
Yeah, I was actually going to push you on that. So that sounds like I could create a structured interview plan. I could say, we're going to test for, Nick, you test for curiosity. Elaine's going to test for, communication.
Yeah. What
would the questions look like? Is there an exercise involved? Like, what
we're definitely a big exercise company, like in terms of practical exercise, because as you know very well, there's so many things that people do wrong in interviews, and I know you're going to help fix that. One-on-one interviews are just not, conversational one-on-one. Tell me about your background. They're just so useless, right? And so we do them because it's sort of natural, like getting to know people. Like, so there's a social aspect to it. But the two things that we do, one we've been doing forever, and the second one we added more recently. So the one we've been doing forever is presentation. So from like 2013, every type of role, almost every type of role has a presentation. If you're a CSM, you come run a mock EBR, right? Executive Business Review. And so we pretend to be the client and ask questions and so on, right? If you're a salesperson, you run a mock sales call. If you're an executive, you actually present to our exec team on an outside-in point of view on SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats on Gainsight, and your 90-day plan, right? So we've got that rhythm, and it's pretty dialed in. Not every job, but a lot of people use it. And then on top of that, something I added in the last kind of 3 or 4 years is a methodology, which I think it comes from the book Who, which is by Jeffrey Smart. GH Smart is a company that does like professional interviewing, as some people probably know. His book Who is pretty good. And one of the things that they talk about is they have a sort of a kind of a top grading interview format where you go through each person's job, the whole history. Right. And you basically say, okay, why'd you take the job? What was the charter that you were hired for? What was the accomplishment you did versus that charter? And then this is the hard part. It's called threat of reference check. When I call, who is your boss? Okay, your boss is, Sally Smith. Okay, when I call Sally Smith, not if, but when I call Sally Smith, on a scale of 1 to 10, how's she going to rate you? And then what's she going to tell you you did great, and what's she going to say you really messed up on? And it's a little challenging. And so frankly, I'm not as, sometimes I slip out of, I say, what if I called them or whatever? But I basically, to really make it like, what is that person going to say about you? And then, the theory is people will be a little more candid about it. At a minimum, I end up learning a lot about how inquisitive they are, right? So like, there's people who just don't have much to say. And that's actually really hard. I'm like, okay, we're a big self-development culture versus I just hired somebody very recently. He just accepted yesterday. And like, he was totally open book about, negative feedback he got or constructive feedback and what he's doing about it and hiring a coach. And that was like, okay, this is awesome. I love it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, so we talked about these are things that feel like they are, regardless of how you scope the role, how specialized or broad it is, like curiosity, learn the product, those things are essential kind of in the CS field in general. That's
right. And curiosity, by the way, applies also to learn the customer, right? So I think that there's a lot of CS and sales is just like genuinely be interested in other people's businesses, right? Like, oh yeah, wow, I want to learn about what you do and how you work, and how your company makes money and what your culture is. And I think our best CSMs at Gainsight have that genuine curiosity.
That's great. One thing, and this also came in from another question ahead of time from Brian, who leads sales at Boxcast, talked about, eventually the organization evolves. So you go from hiring like generalists who needs to do everything to some sort of specialization, right? Onboarding and training specialist, implementation, technical support, account management versus customer success. In fact, like there's a million different ways to slice it. And actually, I know y'all have done an interesting study on this, which we'll come back to in a bit. But how did the CS org evolve over time? Like, when did you start to specialize? How did you know it was the right time to start breaking apart roles and not just have the jack of all trades, but separate kind of roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, it's interesting because Dan Steinman, who had come from Marketo, had a lot of experience in this area. And they had a specialization. So, we did it actually relatively early in a couple areas. So we from the very early days, we had onboarding and customer success separated. Now, I'm not sure if that was the right call, being totally honest. I don't think that was the right call. I think it might have been better if we just had sort of a clear one person owning it. And so, but I think eventually you need to do that. And there's also a phase where you go from CSM doing everything, and then you have onboarding, and then actually onboarding becomes like services, meaning it's not just onboarding. There's lots of different services you can offer a client. And then support we did in 2013 and sort of end of 2013. I remember Emily McDaniel, who still runs support. I remember interviewing her. She'd be our first support person / run the team. And I was like, I don't know if there's anything for you to do here. I don't know if I said that or thought that. And then like, I don't know, but I definitely like afterwards have laughed with her about that. And she just like is incredible. And it was so important. And by the way, that obviously comes down to a little bit how technical your product is, because our product has like a technical component, which is like configuration data and so on. Right. And so it was really important to be able to do that well. And our support team's a massive strength of the company. And so we did that early. We did services and onboarding a little too early, I think. We did account management, I'm kind of go back in my history, but probably like 3 years later, 2-3 years later, because, then we started seeing this sort of commercial versus value, a CSM driving adoption value, account management, managing commercials. And in particular, as we had more products to sell and things like that. And so today we have, what I would consider classic specialized org, meaning CSM driving adoption value, account management driving kind of the commercial and kind of growth and new products and so on. Technical support, dealing with the issues from a technical perspective. On the services team, handling onboarding, but also some ongoing services as well. And then we actually have a training team, because eventually you might break that out too, if you have training offerings. So,
is there like a single most common big mistake that you see CS leaders make when they are going through this kind of evolution?
Yeah, so many. Yeah. I wish there's so many. So, but let me give you a couple that are probably common early mistakes. I think one is there's a decent number of companies that have hired CSMs that are pure relationship people early on. And if they have a technical product, they end up regretting that a little bit, and they end up having to kind of reboot the program, which is that sucks, because obviously some people have to move on, new people come in. That's just not good for anyone. So that's one thing, is sort of, okay, like make sure they're technical enough for your buyer. It's really about the buyer. If the buyer is like, your buyer is probably not super technical, right? And so you don't need to approach that buyer with a super technical CSM. But imagine you're selling security technology, right? And you're like somebody who really doesn't have any understanding of how sort of security and technology work. It's really hard. And now it doesn't mean people can't learn, but if that person doesn't come into that meeting with the right engagement, so that's kind of one, is getting the right fit between the CSM and the customer. I think that's something that people mess up a decent amount, and we've gone through our own iterations of that. I think a second thing that is a process companies go through is sometimes they start out and they create a CSM team, and then maybe they're not getting the results they want as a company. And then sometimes they like abandon the whole CSM thing. And then often the CEO will say something like, oh, we don't need CSMs because everyone's in CSM, in customer success. Right. And then it's like, my question in my head is, okay, so you don't have salespeople because everyone's in sales too, right? And you don't have engineers because everyone's in engineering, right? Everyone just naturally just does everything. And obviously that's a fallacy. You need the whole company aligning on CS and helping drive customer success, but you need somebody actually thinking about it every single day. So this idea of like starting and stopping and, firing the CSMs and then trying to bring them back, it's like an incredibly predictable movie. Like it's incredibly, and I've seen it over and over again. And if you're unfortunately the CSM team in that, have comfort. Two things. Number one, the job market's hot. So if your company's not the right one, you get another one. And your company will probably actually re-adopt it, a year or two later, based on my experience. And then the third thing I'd say is just in general, I think that if you wanted to perfect a couple motions early, one of them is doing an awesome job with onboarding. And I don't just mean like the project, I mean the experience. Like we actually today, we do everything in Gainsight a little bit nutty, because one of our values is childlike joy. And so we bring like our values to our onboarding. I make videos for the customers. We had a huge customer go onboard a big telco, and we brought a DJ to the launch event, virtual, it was amazing. So onboarding experience. And then the last thing I'd perfect is sponsor change. Like that is the thing that you say that word, stakeholder change, and every CS person in the world gets that memory of that person that loved everything you do, and then they left, and then the new person's like, why do we have this relationship? And they're not responding to your emails. It's literally just a Taylor Swift song, right? And so getting that process to be great, noticing it, having the right outreach, reaching out to the old sponsor to get some intel on what happened. So because you people that left companies, by the way, are amazing. They'll tell you like everything about like all the details. So yeah, that's some stuff.
You want to be on like text message.
Text message with that person. If I'm on text message with like probably like 1,000 customers. I mean, tons, right? And like a lot of our CSMs.
Not one thread with all 1,000.
Not one.
Like a running thread on text.
Exactly. That's funny. I love that.
So you mentioned three things, but the second was we see people abandon CS when it's not working because they're like, everybody owns CS. That's the same exact thing that people say about hiring.
Yeah.
Everybody owns hiring.
Totally.
Not everybody owns recruiting. Right? Recruiting owns recruiting. Although everybody also owns recruiting, or everybody needs to be sourcing. But when you think about hiring excellence, and who owns it at Gainsight?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, honestly, can you give me the answer? Because I think that is an unsolved problem, and I think that's why there's so many parallels between BrightHire and Gainsight, and sort of the vision of both our companies. We have an awesome recruiting team. Don Thorvan runs a team, and actually we have a similar team, Harika, in India. We have this amazing recruiting team. There's such not just like the people they bring in, but the experience for candidates, and they really channel our values. But clearly, like the hiring managers have to be involved. And, I feel like some hiring managers at Gainsight are really proactive, and other ones are, just a little bit more like, waiting for the applicants to show up in the ATS. And so I think that is an unsolved problem right now. Yeah. I'm trying to drive more of it at the top level. I'm trying to also practice what I preach and show what I do, because we hired somebody very recently in a senior role, and the reality is that it was we were marketing to these people it's they're very in demand, right? Really good people. And so we will probably talk more about it, but I'm sending them our silly videos and GIFs and text messages. I'm trying to get them to engage, so we need more people to do that.
Yeah, this is really, you posted something recently on your LinkedIn feed. Your team hired, I don't know, maybe 150 folks or so in the last quarter. And you said it wasn't easy.
No.
And the bar continues to rise in terms of winning the business of potential employees. And then it was like a call to action. It was almost like a LinkedIn post to your own team. It was it's time for us to step up.
Totally.
What's hard about getting hiring right? And what does that mean? What does it look like to step up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably, at least as I reflect on it, you have to kind of be pretty self-aware of your company's advantages and disadvantages to a potential candidate. Now, and when I say disadvantage, I mean, what's going to make you stand out? Because every single company has similar sets of pitches about how, oh my gosh, we're growing so fast, and this is going to be a pre-IPO company, whatever, right? Everyone's got that, especially right now when the bubble is so intense, right? And there's so much money chasing so many people. And so to me, one of the things is really getting people upfront to understand what's special about your company and being honest about that, right? Gainsight is I love it, right? It's my life. It's my baby. And there's some things that are unique about it. I think our kind of culture and values and the opportunity to create a category are amazing and unique. And then there are other things that are great, but also there are lots of other companies that are above 100 million of ARR and growing fast. There's a lot of those, right? Yeah. So kind of getting upfront the things that are unique and making that really clear to the candidate, so that if those unique things are things that they care about, then this is a great fit. But if those unique things are not differentiators from their vantage point, then go to, UiPath or Snowflake or one of the other amazing companies out there, right? And so I think that's something upfront to really try to help people understand. And I feel like people bury the lead on that. And that's later in the process. I think just upfront, hey, look, this is what's unique about our company. Lots of other things are pretty similar that, some people love it. Actually, the people that work at Gainsight love it. So is it for you or not?
As we talked earlier, you talked about the interview process, the who method, top grading, trying to be rigorous, testing for, curiosity and the things that are essential in the role. And what we were just talking about was selling, marketing. Yeah. As a CEO, which of those things keeps you up at night more? Which one are you more afraid of? That we're not going to market and sell and get the best people to opt in, or that we're not going to interview effectively, and so we're going to let the wrong people in? Which one of those is scary to you?
They're both, I think both, but in nuanced ways, right? So I think that we're not marketing and selling enough early. And I think that what happens is it actually, if you do it right, it ends up making it so the people that are interested, the ones that you want, right? Because why does somebody fail at Gainsight? It's possible they fail because of a lack of skills or something, but frankly, that stuff gets vetted pretty easily. The reason they would fail is they just are not people that are excited about the values and culture that we have, right? So for example, we have a very transparent, very trusting culture. Employees kind of know everything. If you're a leader that comes into Gainsight and you tend to be a person that doesn't like when people talk and share information and so on, you would hate it here, And so one of the things we try to do is we have our values interview, and we actually have a process for that for senior roles. And but we also want to talk about those values up front. And I actually wrote up for the senior leadership, I have something called our senior team is called the gravity team. And that just gets into how nerdy I am, that everything is a science analogy against it. But the gravity expectations document, which is very detailed about our values and what I expect from leaders. And it's down to the level of recognizing people in other departments publicly to celebrate them, not just people on your own team, things like that. So being really, really clear, and then sharing that all up front And so then the people that are interested in that, I think they lean into it. So it's a little bit of both, but I think it's about really getting the people that are excited about the core of your company into your company.
Have you written anything into the Gravity document about hiring and interviewing?
So it's an active topic. So we actually have not, we have the document, and then I have my chief of staff and my chief people officer sort of with me, the kind of culture bearers of the company.
Yeah.
And they have an interview in our process, the two of them, that they do 2-on-1 with a candidate, and then they score them on value alignment. And then we're piloting that with a goal to then extend that to the rest of the company. So today, I think people interview for values in a more informal way, but I think we want to get to that to be more formal.
Yeah, it's just related to a question. Obviously, you're the CEO, so you don't actually interview most people.
No.
You're not actually in charge of the CS interview process.
No.
You have to build a system or entrust others to uphold the culture, to keep the bar high, to get people to opt in. When you build your leadership team, when you hire leaders, are you deliberately trying to hire people who are good at hiring?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I read that on your interview guide, and I was like, I should be. No, is the very honest answer. And I think that we have had people that are good at hiring. In fact, like as an example, she was one of our, and again, like almost like a founder, Allison Pickens, who was originally our head of business operations, became our COO. She's now an investor now. She's incredible. And she was amazing at hiring. And so many of the great people at Gainsight are, because of her or people that she hired that then hired other people. And so I've had people that are really good at hiring. But I don't think I've systematized it yet. And I think that the issue is not so much the interviewing and filtering and so on. I think that part is actually fine. We can get better. I think it's people that can go market the job and go outbound, right? And it's just so different when you're the head of a role going out and going to on LinkedIn and sending people emails versus the recruiting team do it. Recruiting team does a great job, right? But you got to get these people yourself, right? And so, like for example, for the senior role, I did the classic thing, which is, email people that I think are awesome in this role and then say, who do you think's awesome, And right. That's such a,
like, oh, me, I think I'm
yeah, exactly. Sometimes they were like, yeah, I'd love to talk. Right. So literally that's happened for one person. And so you kind of get that. That's such an easy thing to do. And so many people miss it. Just email people you respect in a role and ask them who they think are great. And not who's looking, who's great. And then you get that list of people. Then you try to go convince them to talk to you.
Yeah, maybe it's just in a leadership interview, you're just asking like, how did you build the last team that you built?
Yeah.
What activities did you do? Like, how did you market? What was your outbound strategy?
I think I'm going to add that to my list. I like that. You know what? Because historically, I think what happened is, people would ask about followership, meaning, okay, who's going to follow you, right? And I think that's cool, and I think that still makes sense. But especially as we talk about building diverse teams, followership in some ways inhibits diversity, right? Like, it's like, I want to bring in the same people that I worked with. And if the world was not very diverse historically, then followership just perpetuates diversity. So it's kind of like a lack of diversity. So, I would like some followership because, of course, people you worked with, there's some people you trust. But I'd love to see how you went outbound.
Really interesting. The mention of diversity raises another question that was submitted by Valerie Jackson. She's the Chief Diversity Officer of Zuora, and I see her actually in the comments on the right. And she was saying that she gets approached all the time from founders and investors, venture-backed companies, basically asking her, like, when can we start to focus on diversity hiring? Like, do we have to hit a critical mass? Like, we have to hit a certain milestone first? Or the flip side, like, we feel like it's hard when we're running at 1,000,000 miles an hour to create the space, the time, the energy to do this. My hiring managers are trying to build their teams. They have an amazing candidate in front of them. They want to move fast and hire. How do you influence that? How do you stop, pause, and ensure that a focus on diversity hiring is kind of embedded in the way that you hired from the ground up?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I think you have to figure out what's the why for you, right? So I think for a lot of companies and for Gainsight specifically, the why is about our values. It's not just about practicality. There is a practicality too, which is, by the way, you can have an incredibly differentiated company with amazing people. And if you are able to recruit and attract and retain diverse talent, then you're going to actually be able to, it's a flywheel. You do that, more of that will happen, right? So there's a practicality. And then there's some companies, there's a values element. This is just how we want to operate. Bottom line, though, is if you care about it either for your business or your values, you got to do it early. There's no doubt. It's just take the pain. It so perpetuates itself both ways. And I will tell you just both ways, because we're absolutely not perfect. We, early on, we did have some really, really talented women that joined Gainsight, and that they were in senior roles. And so I can't say that that's something I proactively did. I wish I could say take credit. It just happened. We just had some amazing people. And then what happens is obviously you have a diverse team and on that respect, and then that perpetuates itself. But give you the counter example. We did not have great representation of underrepresented minorities in the US in terms of Black, Latinx people. And so that perpetuates itself too, right? Like the other way. And so in the last year, probably like 1 billion companies, after George Floyd, we put a lot of work into it, made a lot of progress, but you're starting from such a disadvantage, And so do it early. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. If you care about it, you have to do it early.
Is there anything, obviously there's a commitment component, there's a sourcing component to building a diverse team. Is there anything that you've thought about specifically with respect to the interview process? Like what questions get asked, how you think about assessing for traits or skills or competencies that you found aligns with and advances the cause of building a diverse team?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one thing on sourcing, just to kind of make sure that point's not lost, I think the same idea of talking to people that you respect from diverse backgrounds will actually help you get diverse candidates too. So, talk to people from diverse backgrounds, ask them who they know. Don't say what diverse people do you know, just who do you know, right? Yeah. And actually one thing that I find very powerful is when you meet people that maybe come from a diverse background in fields that are relevant to your business, just keep making a list. Like great people that come from underrepresented backgrounds, not that like they're looking for a job, make a list, keep it on your like Apple reminders or whatever, keep that list. And then that's a good set of folks to keep networking with. So that's on the sourcing side. On the recruiting side, I mean, obviously these people are great and they have potential, they have a lot of potential. So frankly, at a fundamental level, there's not a lot that you want to do differently, but I think you want to avoid alienating people. There's a lot that's been written about job descriptions, how they could be alienating. Obviously, there could be styles of interviews that could be alienating. Everyone knows that if the panel is all folks that look, that sort of feel very different from the background of the person, that person might not feel as comfortable. I also think there's some element of just making people feel comfortable in interviews. I never understood the adversarial interview strategy. I guess it makes sense in some type of situations, but I like to email people up front and say, this is what I'm going to talk about. This is the agenda. These are the types of questions, this is the way it's going to work. For example, when people present to our exec team, like I get on a call with them beforehand and say, okay, let's talk about what you're going to present. Do you have any questions? Like, I think making people feel comfortable, which is not just a diversity thing, is good. And sometimes people that come from less represented backgrounds, sometimes don't have that comfort level if everyone else looks different. So I think that's like a legit thing to do just in general. Like I think it's good to make interview candidates feel comfortable and have a good experience.
This is a very tactical question around making candidates feel comfortable in the experience. And actually it relates to one of the questions that got posted during our conversation for the last half hour. You mentioned that you had people give like a presentation, whether that's like from the outside in, or sometimes you have like a CSM candidate do like an executive business review.
Yep.
Are they doing it on like let's take the CMS as an example. Is it Gainsight? Like I'm doing a review based on Gainsight, or is it I'm doing a review based on some fictitious thing, or I'm making up my own? There's always this debate on like.
It's a great question. Yeah.
To get to know the company as part of the interview. Like, how do you approach it?
I don't think we had it institutionalized as a kind of standard answer, but it's a great question. In general, it's about Gainsight now. And I say now, I'll explain why. And so it's, give us a pitch on Gainsight, talk about, how you present Gainsight. We come up with a fictitious company to be selling to or working with. So that is what we do today. I think in the early days, though, that was harder. Because like now, a lot of people that we talk to already know Gainsight, and they maybe use Gainsight, and they know people and they can do the research. And so
homework.
Yeah, do your homework, right? There's tons of stuff on the web. But I think in the early days, I think we did some fictitious, pitch your company, right? Like pitch your company, right? They're obviously in sales. There's that, like, I don't know who came up with the idea of like, sell me a pencil. Like there's a famous story, somebody of like a sales interview tactic is have somebody sell you a pencil, right? So I think there's 3 schools of thought. There's like have them sell the thing or work with the thing that they already know. So, sell the thing that's like kind of generically in the universe, like a pencil or your company. I think early on, it's harder to have it be your company because they just don't know enough, so.
That makes sense. I want to go back to one of the things that you talked about with respect to opening the doors to diverse talent. And that's like, sometimes you're betting on potential. You're betting on somebody who hasn't had the cookie cutter experience or the like for like, but you believe that they can kind of run far. And it's interesting. You posted, I think this was like a response to maybe like prospective customers who like want to build their own internal version of Gainsight versus buy, but you said one of the value props of SaaS is that like the tech evolves automatically.
Right, exactly.
So the buyer should remember that they're buying the future product roadmap, not just the current state product. And it struck me that like you could swap that to be about hiring.
Yeah.
Right? You could say, hey, one of the value props about people is that they learn and grow and evolve. And so hiring managers should remember that they're hiring for the role that somebody could grow into,
right,
not just the role that they can fill today. How do you get a hiring team, hiring manager to think beyond the role I'm hiring for today in the interview process?
I think this is one of the biggest challenges. When I saw that in your question list, I was like, this is such a good question, because I think the further, sometimes the further down you go in an org, the more there's a tendency to hire for the exact job. Yeah. And so when I hire for our team, I'm absolutely hiring for the long term, because you know, especially leadership skills, but also their ability to grow. And you know, the most recent candidate I keep talking about, you know, we had 2 awesome finalists, and there was one that just like felt like, okay, they could be at Gainsight 5 years, 7 years, and keep growing and so on. And so that was really there was a tiebreaker. But I actually have to like constantly talk to our team about, you know, hey, like, do we need somebody that has to be a perfect fit with every single part of this job? Or are we looking for something that's a more intangible trait? And where this comes up actually is also giving people internally more mobility, right? So getting people to take a chance on somebody that maybe doesn't have every single part of like the job requirements, so to speak, but we know them, and then they have great values, and they're a great learner and so on. And a lot of our best people actually, in hindsight, have been people that have moved around internally, and that where we bet on their sort of like values and intangible skills versus like having explicit experience in that job. So that's hard, because I think the earlier you are in your management career, the more you feel like, I just want somebody who knows exactly what to do with this job. But the more experience you get, you're like, actually, I've tried that. And that's not as, so I would love to learn how to teach early career managers this. So far, it's probably been trial and error for them to learn it.
Yeah, part of it may just be you incentivize and promote the managers who are able to get their people into the next job.
And then sort of show some success stories of people moving around internally to open people's eyes, you know. So we've had a lot of people that are like, yeah, they had no experience in that area, but they just did a great job, you know. By the way, I believe practical presentation-based interviewing helps this a little bit, because it gives somebody a chance to show what they can do, even if they don't have the experience, right? Yep. So just because you haven't done exactly that job, if you're able to prepare and do a great job in the presentation, sometimes people stand out that way. Yeah.
So this is another tactical question related to that. Are there backgrounds, industries, profiles that, you know, aren't, I was a CSM, now I'm a CSM, that you found building your own team have been successful in making the transition in?
Yeah, because great question, because every CSM, you couldn't, unless you just started the career recently, couldn't have been.
You had to be something else, right?
You had to be something else. You started somewhere, right? And so, of course, like in general, the most common patterns are they came up through the ranks in sort of a support, technical, or services kind of technical area. So they came from that like domain, or they came out of the sort of sales and account management world. Those are the 2, you know, most common things. And so, and there's not a right answer, because some companies, the CS role is more product oriented, in which case, you know, coming up through the technical kind of ranks is important. Some companies, it's more commercial oriented. So the AM account management type role makes sense. But I think the thing that to think about is, in each of those backgrounds, you almost want to interview for how much of the other type of skill they have. So if it's a support and services person or services person, you want to understand how good they are at like pushing the client to do what they need to do versus just being responsive. Because in support, you're largely responsive to what people need. And if they're in account management and sales, you want to understand a little bit more about how empathetic they are, how much understanding they have of the client's needs, and like serving them versus like selling them, right? And so the ideal CSM is clearly like half like account management, half, you know, support and service. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're describing. It, to a certain extent, flies in the face a little bit of what's been kind of developed as like the approach of structured interviewing, which is like, this role needs this, and so I'm going to ask these questions. It's more like, we need these things, but we need to be responsive to the profile and then lean more into one or the other, which takes a lot more thought, honestly, than
it does.
You know, it's harder at scale.
That's totally. That's why, the structured interviewing and it's got us to a certain point, but jobs are changing so much. It's hard. Yeah. So I think we need more technology in interviewing. So,
so you talked about one of the mistakes that less experienced or more junior hiring managers make is like, I'm going to hire just for the role in front of me, not for the role, that this person can grow into. If you flip it, what's the most common hiring mistake that you see like experienced executives make?
Yeah. I think it's values and culture, but it's not about culture fit in terms of, hey, like, do I want to hang out with this person? That's obviously a big mistake that somebody innocently said years ago. I think it was the airport test, and I don't remember which company had it. But it's a mistake because it just perpetuates, lack of diversity and stuff like that, right? But there is an element of, okay, our company is, like I was saying, transparent and, tends to have people that embrace vulnerability or whatever, and not screening that stuff out. That is the biggest mistake we've made for sure. And it's not that those people aren't good. They're great people. Just bringing those people into a company like Gainsight is just oil and water, right? So that's values interviewing for sure.
We've got like maybe 15 minutes left or so. I wanted to shift a little bit to like your personal journey role as CEO. We were talking about how people evolve and kind of take new roles, and you talked about moving internally into lots of different jobs.
Right.
And if you look back at your own career, you had like a couple of these like 2 to 3 year stints.
Right.
Like chip shot, a couple of years in college, then like, director of product management at X Degrees, and then at Veritas Symantec, and then the general manager role. And each of those was like 2 to 3 years. Was that like a deliberate, I'm going to do these tours of duty for 2 to 3 years and try to build my own career? Is there something magical about that 2 to 3 year period that like, that's enough time to get to know something, but then you want to move on to the next? Like, coincidence? Like, how do you think about your own career journey?
Yeah, I think the first couple were more random, like Chip Shot was really hot and then it went out of business. And then my second startup that I wasn't the founder of got acqui-hired pretty quickly. So those are just totally random, no strategy in them. But then when I went to a big company, Veritas, which was like a public company, and then they got bought by Symantec, and I was there 5.5, 6 years. I think there is some element of you want to do something new. And that's something that I think a lot about when we talk about our team, right? There is a natural cycle of like, hey, ambitious people want to keep doing new things and taking on more and show kind of their LinkedIn profile getting better and so on, right? And so there is that desire, and I think the cycle time is shrinking actually, as we all probably experience, right? It's a little bit more like, wow, I haven't gotten promoted in the last 6 months or whatever, that kind of thing. And there's certainly like a peer pressure thing of seeing other people get that. So I think it was more about that in the larger company. It wasn't, the first couple were just luck. So
makes sense. Now that you find yourself in the CEO spot, you have like obviously a unique position where you have to be thinking very big picture. Do you have any mental heuristics or approaches to making like very big decisions?
Yeah, it's funny. There are definitely some I can reflect on that I've made. One thing that like I do like the Amazon, type 1, type 2 type framework, right? Which is like, is this decision reversible or not, right? That's the idea that like there's one-way doors and two-way doors, and one-way doors you should put a lot of thought into. Two-way doors you should just make a decision and then move on because you can always reverse it later. So I think that is a simple, helpful framework. But for the things that are those bigger picture decisions, I think that like one thing I've tried to do is think about my cognitive bias and sort of, manage against it. So for example, I definitely have a cognitive bias of like, I like people, I like to be liked. Therefore, I'm absolutely susceptible to the last person I talk to bias, right? Which is in interviewing a big thing, right? Last person, you're like, oh my God, this person's so great. Wait, this person's awesome too. And this person's so good. That's the best word. No, actually, what about the other one? And so one thing that's helped us a lot at the senior levels, and again, I think we want to institutionalize this, is scorecard-based interviewing to like basically, again, it's from that book, which is a good read. And, you basically write out the attributes and you kind of score each person and you try to make it really quantitative. And then also what I do is I actually have everyone on the team that interviews score these people, put them in a spreadsheet. And it's not like I'm just like choosing the highest ranked candidate, but it does force me to think about what I really want. And when I get to that final call, which is what you're talking about, I'm making that final call with a little bit of like trying to step away from the last meeting effect that I've got. Yeah. So what is your cognitive bias? You have them. I have a ton. And how do you like be aware of it?
Super helpful. Staying on kind of the big picture, you drew earlier a couple parallels between like the world of CS and the world of like hiring and recruiting. Part of it is like the ownership piece. Another one, a big one, is automation.
Yeah.
Like, there are chief people officers who will say, in my ideal world, I've shrunk my recruiting team by X percent, 80% because we able to automate a ton of stuff and achieve the same outcomes. And then of course you go like look at a recruiter, or you look at a TA leader, or you look at like Don on your team, and you're like, no, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that they are managing that you just can't automate out.
Right.
What do you think about the arc of automation in the world of CS? Like where does it on like the journey of, where we are today to what fully automated looks like, or if you just say like, where are we in that journey? What do you think comes the next,
Yeah, totally. I think there is a great parallel, because I think that, certainly there was a misnomer in the early days of CS that this was just going to be about AI and data science and just knowing exactly which customer is going to churn and then fully automating that. That was actually like a vision for some companies in the beginning, and it was completely wrong. And what happened was it was actually more about initially standardizing processes, driving consistency, and providing data to help people make better decisions. And then over time, it became about automating some of the lower value stuff to give people more time to deliver a great experience to the customer, right? And so every hour you're pulling data from 7 systems to get ready for a meeting is an hour less that you can do a great job of like looking up the customer's, personal interests and finding a way to connect with them, right? And so I think there's a direct parallel there, where how do we do a much better job in the candidate experience by having some of the other stuff be automated. So that's kind of one theme. And then the other thing is in CS, one of the other things you do if you can automate is you can be more proactive. You can be thinking about the next thing that's not even come your way yet. And obviously in candidate world, how do we be more proactive both with that candidate? Maybe it's like, how do I get them to really like us in this first meeting, looking them up? Or it's actually, how do I go get some more candidates proactively by talking to networking with some people and what we talked about before. And so I think this idea is not you're automating away the job of a CSM or a recruiter, because in tech, everything's growing. It's not about automating people's jobs. It's about using the benefits of automation to improve the experience and the proactivity.
You talked a lot about Gainsight's values and hiring values and building culture on those values. And one of the values that you've espoused is like human first.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Human first is this, the story is that basically in 2015, we'd always been a very values-driven company, but 2015, we had an offsite and we were trying to become more of a grown-up company. And we were doing our first proper like annual plan or whatever. And we read a book called Scaling Up. Scaling Up is a really good book, actually, if you're like kind of a growth stage company. And they have a template. It's called the one-page strategic plan. We still use it to this day. And it has, you fill out everything for the year. So what are your financial targets? What are your goals for the year? But you put in your values, and there was this box that said purpose. What's company purpose? And so we were like reading about purpose, which that term was sort of coined to some extent by Jim Collins, who's a famous business author. And the purpose is sort of about like why you exist, right? And so we went through this process, and I've written blog posts about it, where we were like, okay, why does Gainsight exist? And I was like, well, okay, for some people the purpose is, oh my God, I can't wait till we go public and make a lot of money. And that was like, that's not enough for me. And part of it is like, I'm super into science on the side, and my mom always really wanted me to be a scientist. Like she actually still says that you can still go to science. And so it was like, that's not enough to impress my mom. And then the next level was, okay, well, maybe the purpose is about, our software and helping our customers. And we're like, that's cool too. But, look, at the end of the day, we built software that we sold to other B2B companies, that sold to other companies, that sold to other companies. And eventually somebody has helped at the end in like a real consumer, but that's like 17 levels of indirection, right? So that wasn't enough. And then we were like, look, well, we are a very values-driven company. This actually does feel like a real thing at Gainsight. It's real to who we are. And I think the values were in response to this idea that's in the business world that I think is becoming less of a thing. But for a long time, it was like businesses exist for the bottom line. And you should leave your emotions at the door. And employees are assets, and you need to be tough and you need to be brutal. And that's why people had such inhumane processes in every part of the business, whether you talk about treating their customers well, or their employees or candidates or anyone else, or the community around them. And this idea that, look, we got the plot wrong. Businesses don't exist for their own sake. They exist for human beings. Human beings created businesses for ourselves. They don't exist on their own. They're not a thing that just has to keep going. They're here for us. And so businesses, at least some businesses, could operate in a different model where you just are a little more thinking about the human being in every dimension, right? Like the candidate that's coming in, or like the tougher examples, the employee that's leaving. And so many companies treat their employees that leave like they're dead to them, right? Like my first response is, congratulations on your new thing. How can I help? And then thank you for everything you've done. And what can we learn? But never make them feel bad about it, right? Or companies that dehumanize their competitors, right? And I think there was a thread on this, right? On LinkedIn that you guys started, right? Like dehumanizing competitors, making them feel like they're not real people. Competitors are just trying to, feed their families and have a good job just like you are, right? And so our what we ended up writing out as our purpose statement in this offsite was, we want to be living proof you can win in business while being human first. And the idea is like, we want to be able to win, right? Everyone wants to win. We don't need to be the greatest winner of all time. That's probably a futile exercise. There's no top there, but we want to win enough, and we want to prove that you can do it and still like be human first. And by the way, we don't want to be the only ones, like living proof. We want tons of people to do this. And we didn't come up with the idea. I mean, Salesforce, without the same terminology, espouses a lot of the same values. So we just want to like be a small little part of this big universe and do some things that we're proud of.
Awesome. We've got just a few minutes left. You've talked a lot about the intangibles, curiosity, in particular. What's like one interview question that you would use again and again and again that you would share with the rest of this crew that you feel like would illuminate, the right level of depth on curiosity?
Yeah, one of the, if I'm trying to assess that, I do ask about, what are you learning right now? I think that's an interesting thing to like. It's probably a little disarming for some people. Like, wait, what am I supposed to be learning? I thought that's done once you leave school, right? But you get some interesting answers. And I think that's what have you learned from the last year or whatever, right? I think that's an interesting one if you want to pull on the curiosity thread.
Awesome. What are you learning right now?
Trying to learn, and I've learned 4 chords. Trying to learn guitar, learning golf, and I am constantly trying to learn about the theory of the mind and consciousness and what our conscious experience is. So those are my 3 things.
Awesome. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Conversation, hopefully super helpful to everybody on the line. And happy birthday. You have big plans for this afternoon? You're going to go
we got a walk with my wife for an hour. And then we have 3 kids, 15, 12, and 9. And so we're going to watch the Muppet movie tonight, which is one of my favorites.
The Muppet movie, a classic. Yeah. Awesome. All right, man. Nick, thank you for joining. That's a wrap.
I'll just say, Teddy, I've done a lot of these. You're one of the best interviewers I've ever met. So, which is good given what you do for your job. So congratulations.
I appreciate it. And for the folks who are on, tune into the next one, Building the Flock. So the former CEO of Twitter, Dick Costolo, is joining on Wednesday, June 16th. That's going to be a fun one. Nick, maybe you'll show up for that one too. Throw a question in.
Yeah.
All right. Have a wonderful birthday. Have fun with the wife on the walk and the kiddos with the movie. And
thanks a lot. All right. See y'all. Bye.
Take care.